ready? Okay, go ahead. And I am ready. And I want to, in my comments at least, make a bridge from the first session this morning with Jonathan Fox and the more detailed presentations that will follow. As stated here, I want to accomplish some things, and I hope you will agree with them and come with. The second point may be really important here, in that no single test can satisfy the information needs of everybody who wants to use it. And yet we see an ongoing, worldwide ongoing tendency to try and use a single test for multiple purposes. And I'm going to suggest an alternative approach that I think will work better. Also, as I speak, there will be a constant tension between the need for detail and the need for simplification, because both needs are constant in our world. As we talk more, we'll come to this again and again. What is the most complex thing in the world? Maybe humans. But after that, it's how humans communicate. Language, I believe, is the most complex of all human behaviors. There's nothing humans do that's more complex than the communication and the language they use. We then try and simplify that and describe it, and we set performance standards. We try and measure ability. The key components of these standards have to be task, in this case a communication task, to be accomplished within some context or setting, and some description of how accurately it is redone. Now this task conditions accuracy makes it really simple. However, when you look at the complexity of human communications, the number of combinations of task conditions and accuracy are infinite. That's, in a simplified way, even evident in short summaries of language ability. The left column here is a function or task column. That doesn't barely shows up with the lazy there. We have context, topics, and accuracy. And this scale may look familiar. It's a summary of the U.S. government's scale, often called the Interagency Language Roundtable Scale. But you'll see things that link from this over to CEFR. They also link to your ABC system. In general, it talks about increasing levels of complexity of task, increasing range of topical domains to be handled, and increasing accuracy expectations. Even with this really, really simple chart, if you were to give a profile rating for every possible combination, any math majors here, how many combinations are possible with 6 levels and 3 categories? 6 cubed, which is 216 combinations. So somebody could be able to support opinions, but only about concrete real-world things, and their accuracy would be so weak that they could only be understood by someone used to dealing with foreigners whose first language would be shared with that person. What rating would that person get? Well, it could be one of those 216 profiles, but administrative needs generally drive us to say, no, we're going to use a threshold system, not even an average. We're going to take the lowest rating in any category, and that becomes the overall rating. Does not capture that person's capabilities completely, but it's useful at the far end in terms of what can the person accomplish. Okay, now back to this theme of how simple should things be? Well, it depends, but one thing that occurred test, with the types of tests and the types of items used in that test. But let's just back up again a little, just for a moment, and talk about general ability. How do we define ability? This is Anderson and Krathwohl. Does the name Krathwohl ring a bell for anyone? Graduate student of Bloom's Taxonomy, the most quoted, least read publication ever, according to Bloom.
And the revised.
And the revised version by Krathwohl and Anderson actually says it's not one dimension, multiple dimensions. You have categories of cognition. They list 6 of them: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. And then they say you use those categories of cognition in combination with types of knowledge: factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural, and metacognitive. But they don't stop there, or it wouldn't be a book. Each of these categories has subcategories and subtypes. But wait a minute, gee, that's more complex than we could probably handle on a daily basis. So I'm going to try a simplification of their categories. Because, again, looking at just those 2 types, 6 levels of cognition, 4 types of knowledge, you can get 24 possible combinations. And that isn't an adequate summary, probably, of ability. So let's go for 3 levels. See if we can summarize the 3 levels. And this will be convenient because I generalized next into 3 types of tests. Okay? Notice I have on the left the 6 categories of cognition, and on the right the types of knowledge. What are the kinds of things that you normally try to remember? Factual information. So I lined those up. And then I called that level 1 ability. Level 2 ability is the ability to understand or apply. What kind of knowledge would fit there? Well, conceptual. And then the top levels of cognition, analyze, evaluate, create, seem to work well with procedural and metacognitive. So that gives us levels 1, 2, 3. Well, it's hard to remember what does 1, 2, 3 mean. So I lined this up with some other terms used in educational psychology: direct application, near transfer, far transfer. I found it lined up pretty well. When you learn something, you can learn it for direct application, rote learning, or you can work on transferring it to similar situations or to far applications. Again, direct application, people remember factual knowledge, they memorize, they focus on the content of a specific course, textbook, or curriculum, and from the student's perspective, the goal is to just learn what's being taught. Your students do the same thing my students do? Is that going to be on the test?
Yeah.
Okay. Near transfer abilities. People understand and apply conceptual knowledge in familiar settings. They have semi-rehearsed responses. They focus on a limited set of tasks, so we're talking about communication. And they can apply what they've learned within this range of predictable situations. So what's far transfer? Far transfer now involves this procedural metacognitive knowledge, and they apply it to analyze problems, evaluate evidence, create solutions, to communicate in settings that are not predictable, that they've encountered for the first time, but they can still respond spontaneously and appropriately. All right? I warned you there's going to be now 3 types of tests. Do these terms sound familiar at all? Achievement test, performance test, proficiency test. Let's quickly go through those. Now, just a caveat, I do know that there's a continuum behind all of this, just as there was with the other students. But it's useful to look at perhaps 3 segments of that curriculum, of that continuum. Curriculum based on one end, leading up to real-world curriculum independent tests on the other. So achievement tests are the curriculum-dependent and de facto rote responses, content-specific textbook curriculum. Performance tests, rehearsed rehearsed, semi-rehearsed responses. You're moving beyond rote, but you're still working within constraint from your predictable settings. And then proficiency tests to measure which skills have been so automatized that they are transferable to new, unpredictable settings in an automatic way. General ability to efficiently accomplish tasks across a wide variety of real-world settings. Okay, so we have some three categories of ability, 3 categories of tests. Now, let's go a little deeper. Within those tests, what kind of test items should we have? Recognition items, multiple choice, matching, production items where you actually have to produce the answer on your own, synthesis items that require you to pull everything together and create a response. Here's some examples in recognition, production, synthesis, 3 responses with analysis and justifications, case studies, complex problem solving being the 3rd category. You think we can do something with aligning these? Yeah. There seems to be a natural alignment here. Direct application learning lines up with achievement testing, and achievement testing often uses recognition type items. Near transfer to familiar settings, performance testing actually requires the person to produce answers rather than just recognize answers, and does so usually in a familiar setting. Far transfer learning would be tested by proficiency tests that use synthesis type items. Often case studies are something relating to the real world or a simulated real world setting. Now, some say when they get into proficiency testing and transfer and testing of far transfer learning that it's unfair. That you're not really testing someone's language skills, you're testing their intelligence. You ever heard that argument? Others say, no, you're not really testing their intelligence, you're just testing whether they have enough language to show their intelligence. I know when I speak languages other than English, I am not nearly as smart as I am in English. And given where I'm starting from in English, that's a bad situation. Others go beyond that even and say your level of language limits your knowledge of the world. Ludwig Wittgenstein was one of the first to probably state that back in, let's see, when would he, I can't remember when that was published, but I think it was right at 1910, 20, somewhere in there. You can look it up. All right. So now, what kind of learning is tested with proficiency tests? I've added some things onto that scale you saw earlier. And colored them, green for far transfer, blue for near transfer, red for limited transfer. And what we find is that rote response in the US government setting doesn't get you even to level 1. Level 1 requires creating new utterances, saying things you've never heard before. Level 1, or the actual scale, the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages, requires the creation of multiple sentences, but it can still be within familiar settings, so that gets you up to this level where intermediate.